Okay. All right. Hey, ATC. Um, I saw your little message there. Um, I'll let you know what's going on. I didn't find any news items for tonight. I didn't, see any news articles to read over in terms of comics. So what I decided to do for tonight, and I'll give more of an official announcement when we get more people. And I'm still kind of doing some last minute research here. Um, Figured it'd be a good time to go take a look back at the golden age of comics. The first few years back in the 30s and stuff. I'm just doing a little preview stuff real quick. So if I'm not talking much, I'm just doing that at the moment. But hopefully, hopefully by the time everybody gets in here, I'll have some stuff to really talk about on that. So, anyways, I'm gonna shut this up for a moment. Oh, cool. Figure since I do cover classic stuff as well, I might as well at least put a little more emphasis on some of that at times, especially when there's not much in the way of news stories. So, anyways, I'll show you guys some stuff here once everybody gets in here. As I said, just doing some preview stuff here. We do know that there were a lot of. I just. Excuse me again. Okay. What you think of Biden's dirty secrets getting exposed? Oh, you mean that it was in fact him and his family that one that I think one one story I one headline I saw was that apparently his family at some point owned slaves. Um, Another thing is that apparently Hunter was actually his son Hunter was actually the one who may have been colluding with Russians. So um, I don't know if that's going to totally get a lot of people. You know, it might hurt him in the Sun Belt a bit more. It might hopefully, but I don't know if it's going to have as much. I think, as I said, at this point, a lot of people have already made up their minds on who they're going to vote for. So the debates aren't even really necessary at this point. I think everybody kind of has already decided who they're going to vote for. Um, and that the mainstream media here in the States will just keep covering for him. So, anyways, that's my whole take on Biden's secrets being exposed. Anyways, I didn't mean to do that. I gotta. Book of Fun Comics. Uh, Excuse me one more time here. Like I said, I'm just doing some last minute research here, just so that so don't mind me if I'm not talking as much. Just trying to see just how far some of new comment, uh, highlighting in my own mind some stuff to look at. We do start talking about it. Yeah. What popular started in 1936, huh? Looks like. Okay. Okay. Cover date of February 19th. And even with that, popular run started out with more or less. No. Let's see now. Yeah, let's see now. Research. Laugh out loud. Yeah, that's what everyone's late. Yeah, well, people, yeah, they usually do get here late, and that's why a lot of times I don't end it. I'd love it if everybody got here at 7 and we got right into it. But even tonight, it was probably a good thing. I'm starting a little late here because um, I kind of decided at the last minute in a way. I got all the stuff prepared for the This Day in Each History, but since I didn't have a news, since there weren't any news articles of note, figured that it would be a good time to go through some of the early years of comics and just see how the comic industry kind of, or how what they would call, I guess, the modern era of or the modern comics. Going back to the golden age period back in the 30s. Some of the early years of the 30s to anyways, I gotta go off for a sec. At least here in the States, anyways. I don't know how it would have been up in Canada. Sure, they would have had a very similar history when it came to that. But anyways, let's see. Oh, there's an explosion. Hey. Let's see. Let's see if anybody else has shown up yet. No, doesn't look like it. Just still you and me. ATC. Well, 34. So things really started to get going here by the time I towards the end of 36. Really, when things started to pick. Okay, so we'll go. Then that'll be one. So three. Allowed. Yeah. So, anyways, yeah, everybody's kind of late. Just give me a sec here. Yeah. So, all right. Let's see what time is it. Let's see. We're coming up on 14 minutes. So I'll at least kind of give you a bit of what's on tap for tonight. I said I wanted to take a look at some of the early days of the modern comic book era. I figured go through some stuff from the 30s, from basically 33 to 36. At least here in the state. Again, I don't know what it was like up in Canada there around that time. How much comics they got up there. I know that's the 30s. It's well before our time, but still, it's kind of interesting to just look at how some of the art form and some of the media, some of the storytelling, the medium, what was being communicated back then. When you go into those little worlds, when you go into your escapism, what escapism was like back in those days. What stories were people reading in the comics, whether they be kids or adults or what have you. What was out there. So I figured it'd be a good time to just show you guys some of that. Here, let me go ahead and put that up. That's the one right there. Goody. Okay. um, and before you say anything, no, um, this is not my site. No, there's some other guy named Mike who came up with this site. He's got stuff from this particular site is Mike's Amazing World of DC Comics, but he has other pages that are dedicated to other like Marvel, Archie, Charlton, Dell, Dark Horse, all that. So, um, anyways, excuse me one more moment here. Okay, so this right here, Bunnies on Parade #1 from Eastern Color Publishing. Approximate on sale date April the 1st, 1933. Was basically said to be the first modern comic book. Now, early on, and from what I was just looking through here, just before I got started here, when I was looking through this stuff, some of these early comic books, of course, and I've said this before, they were more anthologies first off. But some of these ones that I'm looking at, like Funnies on Parade and some of the early stuff from Eastern Color, were comic strip reprints. So a lot of the stories that were in here early on from 33, 34, Eastern Color seemed to be the first publisher of comics to actually publish a comic book. This was done as a promotional giveaway, and from what I understand, some of these first issues here were done as promotional giveaways. Okay, so and I do know there's a Wikipedia article on this particular comic, so we can take a look at that a little bit here, at least. A little bit easier to read there. Now, Funnies on Parade here, as published by Eastern Comics, publication date spring of 1933 from Eastern Color Publishing. Format was classified as a colored newsprint magazine. Um, so here's kind of the gist of it. Funnies on Parade is an American publication of 1933 that was a precursor of comic books. The 8-page publication featured reprints of such popular syndicated comic strips as The Bungle Family, Joe Palooka, Keeping Up with the Joneses, Mutt and Jeff, Regular Fellers, Somebody's Stenog. Creators included F.O. Alexander, Gene Burns, Al Cap, and Al Cap was a big name in the early comic book history. Claire Victor Dwiggins, A.E. Hayward, C.M. Payne, Al Smith, and Harry J. Tola. These were more, of course, these were more slice of life, more comedy based comics. These were like based on, like, I know that the Bungle Family, Joe Palooka, and Mutt and Jeff were very popular comic strips and comic books, comic book features well into the 50s. Joe Palooka was, of course, a boxer. So a comic strip slash comic book about a boxer. The Bungle Family followed, of course, the then. In fact, let's look at some of these. The Bungle Family. The Bungle Family was an American gag-a-day comic strip created by Harry J. Tuthill that first appeared in 1918. Originally titled Home Sweet Home, it first appeared as part of a series of rotating strips in the New York Evening Mail. The strip ran until June 2nd, 1945. So that was the strip. And then, of course, the syndicates would include the McClure newspaper. Started out as a comic strip and then went into. So here's I guess some of the scene only, the Bungle Family, and even when they transitioned to comic books, they kept that this kind of comic strip styling right here. These kind of boxes right here. See, was some interesting stuff there. Um, Too Much Santa Claus was, I guess, the name of this particular story. Okay, so called the finest, most inventive, and socially critical of the family strips by comics historian Bill Blackboard, the Bungle Family was a popular domestic comedy that emphasized dialogue and realistic situations. The titular patriarch of the strip, long-suffering, cantankerous George Bungle, voiced the petty frustrations and joys of the common man during the Jazz Age and through the Depression. So, so that's basically the gist of the. That was the Bungle Family. Okay, another popular strip that became a comic at the time was Joe Palooka. Here's a little bit on Joe Palooka. Joe Palooka is an American comic strip about a heavyweight boxing champion created by cartoonist Ham Fisher. The strip debuted on April 19th, 1930, and was carried at its peak by 900 newspapers. It was canceled in 1984. The strip was adapted to a short-lived 15-minute CBS radio series, 12 feature-length films, chiefly from Monochrome Pictures, 9 Vitaphone film shorts, a 1954 syndicated television show, The Joe Palooka Story, comic books, and in the comics he was, and here's some more. There's some more of the artwork there of Joe Palooka. Again, this is from the strip. Of course, Eastern Color started with the comic strips, and then eventually, let's see. Well, they said Harvey Comics is all in this, but I know that Joe Palooka also showed up in the Quality Comics title, Feature Comics. It was Feature Funnies and then Feature Comics. Okay, Fisher devised the character in 1921 after he met a boxer, Pete Latzo, outside of Popcorn. So, in his hometown of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, Fisher devised the character in 1921. This is how Ham Fisher came up with the Joe Palooka character. As Fisher explained in an article in Collier's. Yeah, and then here, made to order, was the comic strip character I had been looking for. A big, good natured prize fighter who didn't like to fight, a defender of little guys, a gentle knight. I ran back to the office, drew a set of strips, and rushed to the newspaper syndicates. Now, of course, prior to comic books, a lot of comics you'd find in your daily newspaper strips. So, characters and stories. Fisher originally changed the appearance of Palooka to fit each reigning real life champion until the coming of African American Joe Louis in the 1930s, at which time the image of a cow-licked blonde Palooka remain unchanged. Though his adventures are mostly low-key, he was pumped up by a supporting cast led by girlfriend Anne Howe, boxing manager Nobby Walsh, his mute orphan sidekick Little Max, Smokey, his blood. So basically, this followed Joe Palooka. Was about a boxer, kind of everyman type boxing character. You know, some interesting stuff there, and then um, looking a little bit more further, Mutt and Jeff was another popular comic strip of the day. Um, Mutt and Jeff was a long-running and widely popular American newspaper comic strip created by cartoonist Bud Fisher in 1907 about two mismatched tin horns. It is commonly regarded as the first daily comic strip. A comic strip meaning it's basically the first comic strip that appeared in newspapers. The concept of a newspaper strip featuring recurring characters in multiple panels on a 6-day-a-week schedule had previously been pioneered through the short-lived A Pixar Clerk by Claire Briggs, but it was Mutt and Jeff as the first successful daily comics. And of course, Mutt and Jeff transitioned from daily comic strip to comic books and other mediums. The syndicates would include King Feature Syndicates, and that name would be King Feature Syndicates would be synonymous with comics, particularly because they were the home to Popeye. They started out with King Feature Syndicates, then went to Wheeler Syndicate, Bell Syndicate, Field Newspaper Syndicate, and then Andrews McNeil Syndication did the reruns. It's basically a humor type, and then you had, as the secondary feature, you had another strip called Cicero's Cat. But basically, these were Regular Fellows is pretty well known too at that time. So, anyways, let me go back. I don't know. We may need to. May just go ahead and do this one as well, just in case, just so we can look at it, so it looks a little bit bigger for you guys. Hey, there's still only two of us in here, ATC. I know you're probably lurking. I hope you're listening into this. But yeah, so the first modern comic book, as it were, was Funnies on Parade, published by Eastern Color. Let's see, I guess. Yeah, was yeah. Okay, hold on one more time. Sorry. Yeah. So, anyways, Let's move ahead a little bit here. No comics came out in May or June, and of course, comic book releases at this time were more sporadic. They weren't monthly yet. Um, Eastern Comics came out with Famous Funnies, a Carnival of Comics #1. Basically, similar format, just a bunch of comic strip reprints, primarily. This is, I guess, another promotional comic. I guess initially they were using, at least Eastern Color. What Eastern Color was doing was helping to promote some of the, some of the comics of the day. A lot of these early comics, comic books were just doing primarily comic strip reprints. And then Eastern Color came out with Century of Colors #1. A lot of these early, like, I guess these early comics from Eastern Color were like promos, one shot promotionals that basically they were like a lot of the stories that were in some of these very very early comic books were newspaper or reprints of the newspaper strips. And as we're now getting into 1934, now here is what's considered the first. Let's see, the first comic book available for sale to the general public in a non-promotional capacity. So this was the first. So Famous Funny Series 1, #1, um, and it was 10 cents at the time. Comic books back then were like, well, okay, there was no price on those previous ones because those were promotional titles. But this is considered the first regular um, comic book, Famous Funnies. And eventually, this title would move on to Quality Comics, and would be Famous Funnies for a few issues, then eventually become Famous Features. The first comic book available for sale to the general public in a non-promotional capacity. And again, as it would imply, it was basically a humor-based comic. You know, basically doing mostly newspaper reprints. 10 cents. Yeah, 10 cents. Comic books back in 1933, 34, 30. Well, okay, not 33 because those were promotional titles, but back in the 30s there, comic books were 10 cents, were a dime. You know, look at how expensive they are now, right? So, anyways, as we continue to move ahead here in time here, okay, here's a well, here's another comic that was published by Eastern. So Eastern Color did a lot of these early comics. Now this one is Skippy's own book of comics #1. There's another kind of reprint humor. Okay, so it says here, you can see right here, comic strip reprints based on the comic strips of Skippy and Always Belittling, I guess. Look at the artwork here on this comic. And of course, stories from this particular comic were reprinted in a number of in like Popular Comics and All American. Now, All American Comics, that one was a DC title, and I'll show you. I won't show you that because I'm only going up to 1936. But as you see here, 1939. But here, All American Okay, so they just showed us the one story there, um, but yeah, these stories from Skippy's own book of comics were reprinted in other comic books as well. Again, a lot of the early comic books were like, "Oh, we got a third person in here. Hello, third person. How you doing?" So we're just taking y'all back on a hey, back up. What's up, boys? Just got home. I'll be listening. Well, it looks like you just got in pretty good in time here, Bat Goat, because I'm actually taking a look back at some of the very very early days of comics back in the 30s. I'm just going over some of the early days of it. Bat Goat, da 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 da. Bat Goat, da 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 da. Bat Goat, da 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 da. Bat Goat, da 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 da. And if you guys can, let's see if we can share the. If you guys haven't already, if you guys can share it, that'd be appreciated because um, we won game number 2 of Trivia League tonight. See if we can get some more people in here and show them some of this interesting comics history here. Um, look at the artwork though, and look at the presentation here. You know, look at that Skippy's own book of comics right there. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you won your trivia league there, my friend. Um, yeah. So, anyways, I'll kind of continue on here, but first I've got to do something here. Huh. Maybe I'll start considering doing this. On nights that I don't have any news items, just taking a look back at years or certain periods of time in comic history, comic book history, to show you guys some of the stuff that was around even back before even your all's time. I guess we'll see about that. So moving on, then there's another issue of this is Famous Funnies number 1. I think this is actually the first. Yeah, this is like the first series. And as you see there, this particular series from Eastern Color ran from 1934 to 1955 for a 218 issue run. I know there was another um, okay, this is Famous Funnies. Like Feature Funnies was from Quality Comics, but this is Famous Funnies from Famous Funnies number 1 here from Eastern Color was the name of the publisher here. And again, um, these are all reprints. And what you would find too with some of these strips, they would move around from comic book to comic book. Bungle Family, I think, would end up over in Quality Comics, Feature Comics. Okay, so here's the Bungle Family, 4 pages, comments, 4 strips printed on non-consecutive pages. Back luck again on page 2, page 31. To settlements. A very odd job on page 34, then page 63. Information. Each page also includes companion strip, Little Brother. No, brother. Harry J. Tuthill. Only reason, okay, I guess it's slightly different from Sheldon Meyer's Little Brother, you know, but that's another story for another day. So, Famous Funnies number 1, probably the first regular comic book, came out here in Approximate on sale date June 1st, 1934. Cover date of July 1934. But again, comic books at this point in time were you see here. So throughout the book, you'd have a bunch of comic strip reprints. Dixie Dugan was another character who was pretty popular. Um, Dixie Dugan, as I understand it, here let me look that one up. Because Dixie Dugan, I know, was also another popular comic strip of the time. Dixie Dugan is best known as a long-running syndicated newspaper comic strip published from October 21st, 1929 to October 8th, 1966. The title character was originally modeled after 1920s film actress Louise Brooks, um, and early stories followed Dixie's exploits as a Hollywood showgirl. So think about that, you know, think about that. This particular comic strip here, Dixie Dugan, that eventually did become a feature in the comic book, followed the exploits of a hey, anonymity. Hey, just got off, heading home. All right, well, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're listening in. We're actually talking about early comic book history, just kind of trying to give you guys an idea. When you get a chance, you should look at some of this stuff, see what I'm putting up here, to see like some of the early days of comic books back in the 30s. Um, let's see, 4 strips printed on non-consecutive pages, 627. So at least some of these earlier comics that Mutt and Jeff I talked about. Um, Another popular comic strip that and it made its rounds throughout the comic books. Famous Funnies and one also showed up in in fact on the cover here you can see on the cover there um Famous Funnies, 100 comics and games, puzzles, magic. It's probably one of the other things that was kind of interesting back then as well, aside from the comic stories themselves. They'd have other features in there like games and puzzles to do, kind of like if you guys remember going to the doctors as a kid. If you guys remember the highlighter magazines, it's kind of like that, magazines for kids. um but the comic books here had like games, puzzles, magic. In animated form, it was you'd see it on all new Super Friends Hour, but they'd have features for health, magic, and all that as well. So, Mutt and Jeff, another popular comic strip at the time. Let's see. Um, yeah, let me go back a couple here to and Jeff. Al Smith was the author of that. But yeah, so a lot of these were like, okay, who else? I'm just trying to see. Oh, Ben Webster was also another major character. Um, I believe he was based on. Let's see, Ben Webster. Let me see. I have to. Let me see. I could go look his character up now. Ben Webster was another. I think another kind of slice of life. I think he might have been a lawyer or something like that. No, that's not. That's not what we're looking for. Dude, not that guy. Okay. Well, I know Ben Webster was a popular comic book, but comic book comic strip actually. I'm sorry, comic strip. I know he was. Let me see. Let me just see this. See, will it be based on? Oh, but apparently they don't have it here. But Ben Webster, yeah. Should not to check that out here. Let's see. Let's see if you guys are asking anything about that. Highlights in the dentist office. Laugh out loud. Yeah, a lot of the early comic books, from what I'm seeing here, were basically Goofus and Gallant. Yep, I've seen that story before. But a lot of these earlier comic books were basically like that. They had a mix of comics as well. I mean, I guess you could even make some comparisons like the Bungle Family to like the Timble, combination of Goofus and Gallant and Timble Toes. Um, but anyways, famous funnies number one. First off, let me get back to. I went back too far there. Let me see now. Oh, actually, what am I doing? I'm so into this, and I'm like forgetting what I'm doing here a little bit. Famous Funnies is an American comic strip anthology series published from 1934. And some of the titles I talked about already, like Famous Funnies, Funnies on Parade, and Famous Funnies, a carnival of comics and all that. Um, so some of the ongoing features in this um, included, of course, somebody's Stenog. I pointed out. Um, let's see if I can find the Jane Arden was another regular feature throughout and I think Jane Arden was actually um, similar to the Dixie Dugan. Jane Arden was an internationally syndicated daily newspaper comic strip which ran from November 28th to January, November 28th, 1928 to January 20th. The title character was the original Spunky Girl. This is the one I was thinking of about the reporter, Spunky Girl reporter. Okay, Jane Arden was basically, think of Lois Lane without Superman. Okay. Um, Actively seeking to infiltrate and expose criminal activity rather than just report on its consequences, and served as a prototype for later characters such as Superman supporting character Lois Lane and fellow comic strip heroines Brenda Starr, reporter, Pulitzer Prize winning columnist Mary McGrory credited Jane Arden with instilling her interest in journalism. So again, comic books back then had more of a diverse set of storytelling. Tough Dame with a gat. Yep. Excuse me a moment while I go off. Oh wait. Oh, I was off screen. I didn't even realize I was still off screen. Oopsie. I hope you guys are enjoying this little trip down memory lane. So, granted, none of us were born back in these days, but it's kind of nice to look at, some stuff of the past where things started from, right? See. And again, 33 and 34, it came out more sporadically. Here's Famous Funnies number 2. Now you guys can see right here, many comic books would do this as well. See if maybe by enlarging it, you can kind of, and you still can't. Man, I gotta enlarge it even more, just so you can read some of the fine print there. Now, when you look at the cover here, this is Famous Funnies number 2. 100 comics and games, puzzles, magic. 10 cents. And as I was mentioning earlier, back in these days, that's how much comics were worth. 10 cents. Think about that. Being able to get a comic book for a dime. You know, love the old comic stuff. History is a great starting point to learn. Yeah, I mean, if I get a chance, I'll read. I'll probably try to read some. At least some of the synopses of some of the comics. Right now, where a lot of the comics that we're talking about here are comic strip reprints, meaning they were already produced. They were already originally published in a newspaper, and now they just put them into book form. It's kind of like the idea of the paperback collections, I guess, that go on nowadays when they just put a bunch of classic stories of a strip or of a particular comic book into one. Hey, Woody, I remember Brenda Starr in the Sunday comics in the '60s. Yeah. Hey, welcome to the stream, Woody. Yeah. Yeah. Of course, I'm taking a look back at like kind of the very early days of comic books. 33 to 36 here. I figured it'd be a good time to go through all that. Excuse me one more moment, gentlemen. And if you guys haven't yet, if you guys can share the stream, see if we can get some more people on here. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who'd be interested in some of this stuff. So, anyways, that'd be appreciated. I remember candy bars and soda for a quarter, 50 cents, and you were in sugar heaven. Yeah, and I know there was a time when, from what I understood, you could get a cheeseburger from McDonald's for like 5 cents or something like that, or a quarter or something like that. Um, so, but here are some of the guys who are featured in this issue. Of course, um, yeah, Harrison Hart, I guess. Joe Palooka, and I explained who Joe Palooka was earlier. For those guys who missed it, Joe Palooka was a boxer. And you guys may have heard the term palooka before. That's kind of uses kind of a palooka or everyday Joe. Mutt and Jeff. Here's a character representing Mutt and Jeff there. So I just enlarged this to kind of give you guys a better look at the cover there. And again, all of these are like comic strip reprints. And of course, they would move around quite a bit too. A lot of these reprints and stuff would just be moving around. Um, so, oh yeah. So, anyways, the 10-cent candy bar or candy bags that came with a cheap toy. Yeah, like Cracker Jacks. Hell yeah, like the Cracker Jack stuff. Those Cracker Jacks were pretty good. Of course, those weren't candy; those were like caramel popcorn, basically. The Venture Brothers episode, "Everybody Comes to Hanks," is one of the few times I heard palooka or beluga. Yeah, well, yeah, palooka is an older term. Palooka, the term palooka was used more back, like in the 30s and 40s. It was part of the lexicon of that time period. As I said, the term palooka usually was referring to like an everyday Joe, basically. Just like the common man, an everyday guy. You know, you were palooka. Let's see. Palooka is a common 30s slang term. Yeah, candy coated popcorn, peanuts, and a prize. That's what you get in Cracker Jack. Yep, that's right, Woody. I'm aware of that. Um. Anyway, so this is feature funnies. Obviously number two here, and at this time, of course, Eastern Color was the only publisher. Of course, Famous Funnies became the first regular comic book that you could get with some form of regularity. Is Famous Funnies number three. This time they did it along. This time, if you notice, they did it along the bottom there. I'll show you guys. And this is a practice that was in some of the comics of this time period as well. You'd see down here at the bottom where you'd have pictures of some of the characters that were featured in the comics. Because this guy right here was representing the Bungle family. Um, I think that's Dixie Dugan right there. I don't, like one of these girls is Dixie Dugan, the other is Jane Arden. So Dixie Dugan was a Hollywood showgirl. Jane Arden was the, kind of tough girl reporter. And here's Joe Palooka again. This time obviously in, doing like, look at that. Gee, where did that ball come from? Yeah. So now, of course, many of the stories in here. Now, these are comic strip reprints, so meaning that they were reprinted from like from newspaper comic strips, but they were more reflective of course, the times they were written in. Obviously, the comics of the 30s were meant to try to help people escape from their poverty and stuff like that. Um, let's see. In the episode, he does this old crime detective type of character, the fast talking, wisecracking, mm, or as Slim Pickens called them in the movie 1941, Popper Jacks. Um, Corn Pop was a bad do. Okay? Wow, I suck. Ah, anyways, so as we look ahead, of course, Famous Funnies number 5, and for a while there, of course, Famous Funnies was, and they had some. Look at this nice artwork here. This kind of cartoony artwork. So you knew they were kind of. Now a lot of these were slice of life type comics, humor strip. Again, these were reprints. Um, Now January of now this is based on the cover date. January 1935. I believe actually no, this is still publication date, I guess. Okay, so Feature Funnies number 7. Now here because I've focused a lot more on DC because DC, probably my favorite company. So I do know there are some synopses here. But this was DC's first. This was first DC comic. Now, back in 1935, they were not known as DC. They were known as National Allied Publications. So I'll kind of enlarge this a bit, show you guys. So right here, DC Comics was originally known as National Allied Publications. Of course, they'd have the address of the. Now, obviously, I was way back in 1935. I don't know if that is still where DC's offices are. Okay. Um, Cover credits artist was Lyman Matthew Anderson. Cover date February 1935. On sale date January 11th, 1935. This was, of course, considered a monthly title. Um, First DC comic, 10 by 15, and at this point it was in black and white. Now, this is probably also the first comic book that had some like drama, action, adventure. This was the first one that didn't just strictly have reprints. And I'll like read over some of the synopses, so you guys kind of get an idea of some of the stories that they were writing back then. Let's see. Yeah, we do all that. As you say there. So maybe a few of these synopses. So this was new. This was the first issue of New Fun. New Fun. New Fun would eventually go on to become More Fun Comics and More Fun. In fact, let me do this. See if I can. Yeah, more one of the earliest American comics. So More Fun Comics, originally titled New Fun, the big comic magazine, aka New Fun Comics, was a 1935 to 1947 American comic book anthology that introduced several major superhero characters and was the first American comic book series to feature solely original material rather than reprints of newspaper comic strips. It was also the first publication of the company that would become DC Comics. Basically, what I just kind of explained to you all. They did eventually, and late as you can see the cover here of number 52. That's a Spectre on that cover. More Fun Comics number 52, February 1940 debut of the Spectre. Okay, so just to kind of give you guys an idea of that. So let's see. Jigger and Ginger. Well, maybe I'll read that synopsis as well for you if you saw that title. and that kind of grabbed your attention. Let's see now. So the first feature in New Fun #1, of course, was Jack Wood. Jack Woods was a cowboy based on Earth 2. As I understand it, he was around the time of. He basically was a cowboy during the versus Pancho Villa. So this is around the time, as I understand it, of World War I, around the mid 1910s. So feature characters was Jack Woods was the feature character. Um, and this is also a time when stories were also on the cover. They had actually stories on the cover. Excuse me a moment. I gotta see what time is it. It's 1:06. Wow, we're over the hour mark already here. But excuse me again. I wanted to give you guys kind of an idea of some of the stories that they were writing back in these days. So Jack Wood, first appearance, next appearance, and on this site that I use, they have a pretty good. Then Don Nogales, a ranch owner, Miguel a ranch hand. These were the two films. And as I was just saying, at this time, as you can see, well, I'll go back in a. As you saw, they would have the stories on the covers as well. So now these stories back in these days too were more serial. Like this was one page, it was on the cover. Okay. So Jack Woods visits the Rio Grande and witnesses a nighttime cattle drive led by ranch owner Don Nogales and his farmhand Miguel. Jack is escorted back to the Nogales Ranch at gunpoint. Okay, so that's a synopsis of that story. I'm going to go back real. You can see right there. Yeah, maybe I should go back here. This is a Jack Wood story that we just read the synopsis on. Back then, this is New Fun #1, the big comic magazine. And back then, of course, they called comics comic magazines. Okay. It says down here, new comic strips, aircraft, radio, movies, sports, adventure. They had a whole bunch of different. These were anthologies back in this point in time. They had a number of very interesting stories here. But this right here was the Jack Wood story. That was the lead feature there. Kind of take you through. So Jack Woods, as I said, was a cowboy in the 1910s. Kind of give you an idea of some of the different settings, time pieces, time periods, and all that. The next feature was, of course, Sandra of the Secret Service. This is basically about a female Secret Service agent. This first story was, and you will see this a lot. Part 1. Many of these stories had multiple parts because many of the early stories, look at that, one page. They would eventually grow 1 page, 2 pages. Sandra of the Secret, the Gavonian Affair, reprinted in Bingo Comics #1, 1945. The writer-artist was Charles Flanders. The feature character, Sandra McLean. Last name wasn't revealed until the 26th issue of More Fun Comics. More Fun Comics, as I explained to you guys, was what this comic eventually became known as. Supporting characters: Lothar, a secret agent; Reynolds, a government agent. Let's see, two Gavonian villains, two Gavonian agents. Um, Other characters: James, who was Sandra's chauffeur; Haskins, who is Sandra's butler. Um, Comments: this story is printed in black and white and was not originally titled, which was the case at this point in time. Like, what I will tell you as we go through this, if you guys see the parentheses here, it means that the story was not originally titled. This was the title was retroactively added. So that was that's just something that I thought you guys might find interesting. The title was retroactively added. Looks like we lost somebody, unfortunately. Hopefully they come back down to 4 people again. But here, I'm going to go ahead and read off the synopses for. So this is the first part of the Gavonia affair. Sandra is carjacked by a gun-wielding, well-dressed man. He is being followed by another car who shoot um, and Sandra's car. I think it's supposed to be at Sandra's car. After the man is dropped off, Sandra returns home and is met by a gentleman caller. So, Sandra of the Secret Service. That's the name of this feature. Um, Again, aside from the cover story, I believe the majority of the stories were in black and white. Okay, so they don't have. My guess is Jigger and Ginger was more of a humor strip. Back out. They don't have a synopsis on that, or otherwise I would have read that for you. Um, we're coming up on an so let's see. Let's try to get through some. See if we can get through some of the. Barry O'Neill, who is Barry O'Neill, Fang Gao of China. This guy was Barry O'Neill was more of a kind of a Playboy adventure, you know. And there were a number of characters like this. Of course, some of them would become costume figures like Bruce Wayne um, and Wesley Dodds. But first, you see, okay. So you had Barry O'Neill's feature, Fang Gao of China. Um, Feature character Barry O'Neill, Inspector Legrand of Interpol, the supporting character. The villains included Fang Gao, leader of a Chinese gang, behind the scenes as a voice only, first appearance. Hu Yak, an assassin. Ivan, an emissary of Fang Gao. Of course, the notations here include the story is printed in black and white. Legrand's name is spelled as one word in this story. The more common spelling, where it's separated in 2 parts, was first used in New Fun number 5. His title, Inspector, was first used in More Fun number 10. A redrawn version. The story was published in Atomic Comics number 1 by Green Publishing. As I was mentioning to you guys, many of these stories shifted around between publishers and stuff like that. Barry O'Neill, this one story in particular, I think ran 32 parts or 32 chapters. So yeah, so the synopsis for this one, of course, was Barry O'Neill meets with the chief of the French secret police concerning Chinese gang leader Fang Gao. The arch villain hires the assassin Fu Yak to kill Barry. After missing Barry with a car bomb, Fu Yak attacks Barry in his hotel room with a knife. And I'm sure if you guys have ever seen like any kind of like movie serial, that's basically how they'd set this stuff up too. You'd have like a lot of these stories were like one page. They would eventually grow in page counts. But you had a cowboy, a female Secret Service agent, a Playboy adventurer. You'd also have Magic Crystal of History. This was re this story was reprinted in Big Book of Fun Comics #1 in 1935. So that was later in the year here. Um, so I know of another source I could tell you more about, like Jigger and Ginger, but we've already ran pretty long here. Wing Brady was an aviator. The Bedouins, Part One. Wing Brady was an aviator. Aviate, uh, he was a pilot. Basically a fighter pilot with actually the French Foreign Legion. Believe it or not, I believe. Wing Brady, supporting characters Slim. Villains were a tribe of Bedouins. Corporal Lavoom and his men, unnamed captain. Again, story printed in black and white. Wing and Slim are soldiers in the Foreign Legion. They spot Corporal Lavoon, and his men under attack by Bedouins in the desert. Foot soldiers would not arrive in time to assist, so Wing and Slim take take a plane to enter the fight, but the plane is shot down. Again, I just wanted to read some of these synopses for you guys to kind of give you an idea of what comic book writing and the stories they were telling at the time. Hmm. I'm sorry, I thought I heard something coming from my pocket here, but can't be. My phone's over there. Oh, I don't believe I didn't even realize that. I'm shows you how much I get into this stuff. And now I gotta. Oh boy, too funny. Shows you how deep into this stuff I'm getting into. And this, of course, these stories, would continue on, and you had a fighter pilot, you had a cowboy. They would even reprint classic stories like Ivanhoe, which I think was an actual. Now the writer artist here was Charles Flanders, but I think Ivanhoe was based. The comic was actually based on the novel, I believe. And they did some novelizations too. I know they also in another one of the other titles they did Marco Polo. Oswald the Rabbit. This story runs across the bottom of the first 6 pages of the issue. Oswald the Rabbit was a longtime comic strip as well. Let's see, what else here? Judge Perkins. I believe that one might be a slice life humor one. Like on Drake. And you notice at this point these were all one page stories, but local Luke. Nope, he didn't get his man. My guess is local Luke's probably a Western type story that could come out of the old West. Grub Hardy. I think that was based on a comic strip about a sailor. You know, and of course you guys can obviously tell the pun there. Scrub Hardy isn't like scrub hard when you're cleaning something. Uh, were they like a wartime publication at first? Um, no, a lot of these comics were in the 30s. A lot of these comics were long before World War II, um, and well after World War One. These were actually comics in the 30s during the Great Depression. Okay, so you had a lot of that going on. I'm sorry, and I didn't even realize you'd asked that until just now. Um, anyways, excuse me a moment here. But just think about these stories and what they were. They were serial in design, meaning that the stories ran across several issues. They were anthologies. You had bunch of different. You had a cowboy from the 1910s. You had, in terms of modern day characters, you had like a female Secret Service agent, a fighter pilot who was involved with the French Foreign Legion. So you had a lot of different settings too. You know, had different settings. You had different locales. You had a whole bunch of interesting stuff there with these stories. The Jack Andrews, I think, was another regular feature for a while. Captain Eric, and they had a lot. They had a lot of again. They had a lot of different types of adventurers too. Captain Eric, I think, was another one that was more of a like seaworthy, like another like one about. It looks like it was more of a comedic one about a buckskin Jim, which was a writer artist Tom Cooper there. Um, Buckskin Jim was my guess, as I recall, was probably kind of like a Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett esque type story. People who were kind of frontiersman type adventure, frontiersman type adventure. That you know, again, when you're in poverty and things are not going right around you, the one thing you need is some kind of escapism. Either need to be taken back to a simpler time where the good guy always won, or take you into another situation, whether it's being a Secret Service agent, cowboy, a frontiersman, a sailor, an aviator. You know, after school is another story. And you notice that, again, these are anthologies and they were one page at the time. Caveman Capers, obviously a Stone Age story. See, fun films, Cat Among the Pirates. I think actually that one became a regular feature. I think. Let's see, Bubby and Beetle, not to be confused with Beavis and Butthead. Bubby and Beetle, my guess, another comedic humor strip. Pelion and Asa. Some of these were probably more like humor strips, and that's probably why they don't have synopses. 2023 Super Polices. This one probably was an adventure one, but probably just didn't last as long. It's the last feature in this particular issue. But written by Ken L. Fitch. Artist was, and a lot of these were, of course, reprinted in the big book of fun comics later in 1935 there. Let's see. But think about this. All these stories here, all these one-page stories. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. In a single comic book, you had 21 one-page stories, many of which, particularly the ones with titles, even with the titles given, after them. As I said, the titles that have parentheses around them means that those titles were given retroactively. Okay, as I told you, a lot of the writing was more serial at this point in time. Back in the 30s, there, a lot of the writing was more serial, meaning that when they did write stories, it was like when they did write stories, they wrote a story instead of writing like one story an issue, one like complete story an issue like they do nowadays, where they take up like 20, 25 pages. They'd have 1 or 2 pages. It would steadily go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 5. But particularly the more popular stories, they would start to most early comics were humor or political. Yeah, yeah, a lot of them. They were a reflection of the times. Some of the more slight humor, slice of life ones were more reflections of the time. Granted, I haven't shown you a whole lot of panels, you know, but if you do get a chance to go back, if you have a way, if you figure out where some of these comics can be found, and you decide you want to read up on them, now some of these are actually in public domain, which means that some of them that are considered public domain, if I wanted to show them, I probably could without getting busted for copyright. Because public domain means that the rights were released from the original, due to the fact that either the original company went out of business, or after a certain number of years, it just became public domain. Same thing with a number of the cartoons in the 30s and 40s and stuff like that. So, but yeah, as you were right there, and that was one of the points I was making here, is that many of the early comics were humor based, with some political satire mixed in there as being a reflection of the time. You know, um, so this is January 1935. Kind of just go through, and then of course here's like famous funnies and new fun again. And again, many of these were like anthology titles. They were pretty much published monthly. You did have a few skips here and there. April 1935, Famous Funnies 10, which again was comic reprints. Some of the characters in here include Joe Palooka, Dixie Dugan, and some of these comics, as I said later, would show up in other, Queenie. Look at that, Buddy and Fatty. That right here, Buddy and Fatty was a comic strip. The problem is I'm sure that the SJWs would say that if we read that strip, it was probably fat shaming. Seaweed Sam, Slim and Tubby, um, Ned Brandt. Ned Brandt was another popular one. Ned Brandt was believe he was like an investigative reporter. You had a lot of them that featured investigative reporters too, in a lot of stories that featured that. But just I just wanted to, I was just reading off some of those synopses because I wanted to give you guys an idea of some of the storytelling, some of the varied storytelling, and what they were doing back in those days. Let's see now. Oh, public domain means there's no trademark copyright protection. Yep. One of the most iconic horror movies is public domain, Night of the Living Dead. Hmm. So, wow, we're already past an hour and 30. Okay, we're already past an hour and 31 minutes here. Wow, we've been going a pretty good while here. Famous funnies, famous funnies, and new fun again. Of course, new fun number 5. So this is the 5th issue of new fun. Okay. As I told you, like Jack Wood's on the cover there. The 5th part of the Gavonian affair, 5th part of Fangao. Um, Fangao of China. The Pancho Villa part 5, like Wing Brady part 5. Yeah, so Jack Woods actually had a secondary story on the cover here. They'd been doing mostly um, let's see, famous bunnies. Famous bunnies number 14 from Eastern Color. Eastern Color and DC. Now, as I told you though, DC was known as National Allied Publications. Trying to Captain Captain Spinker here, another kind of sailor type adventure story. Oh, here we go. This is another. Now I'm going to read this synopsis off because this Doctor Occult, as a point of interest for you guys. Doctor Occult, and you notice it says of Earth 2 here. Doctor Occult was actually was probably considered the first um, superhero of the DC Comics universe. He the first hero who had superpowers. Granted, they were mystical in nature, you know, but I'll go now. The thing is, this is one of those titles that started in another book. So the Vampire Master here in Occult. Um, I think Doctor Occult actually started it out as Doctor Mystic in Centaur magazine. Now, look at the names right there, the writer and artist here. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. You guys might remember that Siegel and Schuster were the guys who originally created Superman. Um, they originally created Doctor Occult was the first superhero though in DC Comics. That was what was believed the first, and this is of course from September 13th, 1935. So about 2.5 years before Superman debuted in 1938. You know, new fun number 6. I knew it was, and this one I wanted to just. Doctor Occult here was the first superhero of the DC universe, created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. I'll read off the. Just trying to see if you guys have commented anything more on it yet, but anyway, getting back to this. Okay, so feature character, and again, another one-page story here has was common for the time period. So this is the first superhero in the DCU. Doctor Occult, an occult investigator. First appearance, next appearance will be, of course, next issue. More fun in the next issue. And in issue 7, it goes from being new fun to more fun. And then I think it's from like issue 7 to 11, maybe 12. For the next few issues, it'll be more fun, and then it will eventually become more fun comics. Supporting character, Rose Psychic, who is Dr. Occult's assistant. She was a medium. She was a medium. Villains, a vampire. Let's see. Other characters, Sander Amster, Mrs. Amster. Comments. Along with Henri Duval, this story is the first published work by Siegel and Schuster at DC as Lager and Ruths. Those are the pseudonyms that they used. This story was printed in black and white and continues in More Fun 7. This story was not originally titled. Synopsis. Dr. Occult rescues Sander Amster from a vampire attack using his magic talisman to ward off the creature. Later that night, the vampire visits Amster's home and bites his wife. Dr. Occult is summoned, substituting his assistant, Rose Psychic, for Mrs. Amster. Dr. Occult sets a trap for the vampire. Again, with the serial type writing here, the story will, some of these early Dr. Occult stories will continue on in the future, in future issues. But again, obviously I wanted to show you that, show you some of this stuff. I was going to try to go all the way through to 1936, but probably just do up to, and then Famous Funny number 16. And then in October of 1935 here was the Big Book of Fun Comics number 1. This was DC's first annual, 10 and a quarter by 15. It had a number of reprints from earlier issues of New Fun. And then here in November of 1935, you had Famous Funnies number 17, but you also had New Comics number 1. New Comics would eventually become New Adventure Comics, and then eventually become Adventure Comics. But ultimately become Adventure Comics. It started out as New Comics and New Comics, New Adventure Comics. So, and of course, here are some of the stories that were in there too. And as you can see, there are a lot of stories in here too. Now, when I was a boy, Don Coyote, Billy the Kid, Cal and Alec. Again, a lot of these were, and as you can tell, this was more of a humor-based comic as well. Chico Chaco, Gulliver's, and here's another thing too. You had you did have some novel adaptations into comic book form. Look here, Gulliver's Travels, Freddie Bell. Let's see. Well, Gulliver's Travels was, of course, and they did also adapt a portion um of Marco Polo as well. Wing Walker, another aviator type hero. Captain Spinnaker and Captain Quick were more like Sailor Naval Adventures. Chippy Jones is a humor one. Strange Adventures of Mr. Weed, which actually started in Famous Funnies, started in Famous a new book of comics, number 137, 1937. So Dickie Duck, Alan de Beaufort. Um, oh yeah, wow, we've really gonna. So I'm gonna try to wrap at least 19, get to the end of 19. We're almost to the end of 1935. And then in December of 1935, of course, now we're up to like three comics being produced, three comics that you could. Now think about that, guys. At this point, in present time, right? You have numerous comic books coming out weekly. Back in these days, you may have had. Look at this. It started with one comic. In 1933, those were all promotional comics, so they weren't to the general. So it wasn't really until 1934 that you started seeing, comic books being, published for the general public. Okay. And here again, more fun number 7. This is again where the title changed from New Fun to More Fun. The editor at the time was Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson. So had Famous Funnies. And again, a lot of these were anthologies and new comics. So I got up through 1935. So, and we're already like an hour and 42 minutes into this. So I think I'll start to wrap it up. Are you guys ready for this day in each history? I know we've gone through quite a bit of comics history here, but I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as. Hope you guys enjoyed listening to tidbits and commentary on some of this comic history. Um, but I think it would be a good time. This would be a good stopping point. We can probably continue this another night or what have you, um, or maybe I'll continue it more. Yay! But basically, my point is that comics were always a reflection of the times they were in. Excuse me a moment while I take care of something here. Okay, so yeah, I think it'd be a good time to start wrapping up here. Like I said, I hope you guys enjoyed looking back through some of the early days of comic history with me. As I looked through some of the titles and read off some of the synopses. Lots and lots of good stuff, Mike. Nice time. Yeah, maybe I'll do this a little more often. Especially when maybe if I can't find much in terms of modern news, maybe I'll like read off some of those synopses just to give you an idea of how they were how they were building the DCU, or well, not just how they were building the DCU, but how they were building some of the worlds of escape that we've come to know. I know. I had read some of those synopses before, the DC comic ones, because I did some of my previous research. But anyways, so today is Wednesday, October the 14th. So I think it'd be a good time to take a look back at this day in each history. So we will go ahead, and day being Wednesday, October the 14th, we'll go ahead and do that. So today is October 14th, 2020. take a look back and see what happened on this day in Nietzsche history. First off, I would like to wish Shaul Guerrero a happy 30th birthday. On this day in 1990, Shaul Guerrero is born. Shaul Guerrero is the eldest daughter of the late Eddie Guerrero. She had a brief wrestling career of about 3 years, was known in the WWE as Raquel Diaz. So I'd like to just wish a happy 30th birthday to Shaul Guerrero and hope she had a good day today. Um, actually, should even show. In fact, I should even show you guys that. Wow, just goes to show you that where my head. Yay! So, anyways, moving on to the next piece of history then. So, on this date in 1995, um, there are a couple of premieres in the cartoon front. This day in 1995, Mad TV and The Adventures of Hyperman would debut on this date in 1995. So that was like 25 years ago today. Mad TV would premiere, of course, on Fox. Would be a late night staple for them for a number of years, and then The Adventures of Hyperman would debut on CBS. So Mad TV and The Adventures of Hyperman would debut on this date in 1995, 25 years ago today. Excuse me one more moment. Hmm. Okay. Anyways, back now. So, one last piece of history to go through before we're off. Before I bid you all adieu for the night. On this date in 2009, 11 years ago today, the 25th issue of the second volume of Booster Gold went on sale on this date in 2009. So on this date, 11 years ago, volume two of the 25th issue of volume two of Booster Gold went on sale on this date. Two features in it were the New Earth's version of Booster Gold, Day of Death Aftermath, written by Dan Jurgens. The cover credits, of course, go to Dan Jurgens as penciler, inker Norman Redmond, who did the ink work. Writer, penciler Dan Jurgens. Reprinted in Booster Gold Day of Death, the trade paperback. Also featuring in here is Jaime Reyes' version of Blue Beetle, Black and Blue Part 2, which was reprinted in Black and Blue, Blue Beetle, Black and Blue trade paperback, written by, of course, Leah Sturgis with Mike Norton on the art. So on this date back in 2009, the 25th issue of Volume 2 of Booster Gold went on sale on this date in 2009. So anyways, that's all of that. Let's see. Um, Forgot about Mad TV. Yeah, I didn't. I never watched it, so but if it was up there, it's. Well, anyways, guys, thank you all for joining me. I hope you guys enjoyed the trip down memory lane in terms of the comic book history there at the beginning. I definitely had fun, looking back through that. And I hope you guys did too. Hearing some of my commentary, you know, just thinking about the escape of that time, a period where a lot of people were financially very destitute, so they needed that escapism. So being able to open up a comic and read about like a Secret Service agent, like like Sandra McLean, or or a Foreign Legion pilot like Wing Brady, or a sailor like Captain Quick, or a cowboy from the 1910s like Jack Woods. That was, I bet you, that was a great respite for many of the people of that time period. Now, I know anonymity. You asked if these again were written around during the Depression, but as we do get into the 40s, you would start to see more and more of World War II being seen in the comics as well. Maybe down the road we'll talk about that as well and look at some of those stories a bit. So, right. All right, everybody. Good night, and I hope to see you guys here tomorrow night. I'm still working on trying to get guests for Friday. Um, it's still a lot of maybes, so hopefully I'll hear back by tomorrow, and I'll be able to make a full announcement, and that we have at least somebody. Um, but if not, I'll open up the studio for any of you guys to join me. So until tomorrow, guys. Bye.